We understand that recalls affect everything from inventory to a pre-delivery inspection to the scheduling process to the experience of the consumer in the service lane, right? So there's all these different facets of the vehicle life cycle and ownership experience that recalls affect, and we really try to address all of those at the right time. Over half the customers that we bring in have been 9 months or more since they visited the dealership. We really help with that kind of at the margin incremental retention.
Welcome to Retention Roadmap, navigating service success for new car dealerships. I'm your host, Bill Springer. Today's podcast is sponsored by DriveSure. DriveSure helps new car dealerships remain the go-to provider for maintenance, tires, and repairs. For information on how DriveSure can help your dealership, go to drivesure.com/dealership solutions. My guest today is Chris Miller, founder and chairman of Recall Masters. At Recall Masters, Chris has built the industry's leading recall management platform, helping dealerships identify, engage, and retain hard-to-reach customers. His focus is on turning what might seem like a compliance burden into a powerful opportunity to build trust and long-term loyalty. Today, we'll explore how recalls, data, and proactive campaigns can become some of the most powerful retention tools in a dealership's service strategy. Chris, welcome to the podcast. Appreciate you being here. I'm being totally honest when I say I've been looking forward to speaking with you. I think recalls are one of those items that are, I don't know, from my perspective, it's almost like it's a gift to the dealership. You know, manufacturers don't like recalls, consumers don't like recalls, but man, dealers should, because it's such a great opportunity, at least from my perspective, in terms of retaining and recapturing or capturing customers that perhaps have never been in a dealership before. Is that a fair way of looking at it?
And it's certainly been a education or re-education process that we've embarked in for the last 10 years since we founded the company, and really making it clear and backing it up with stats to dealerships and OEMs for that matter, that recalls are actually a good thing from a customer retention standpoint, and even acquiring customers that maybe have defected or servicing in independence currently.
Sure. Cool. So this is for my edification primarily, Chris. I've had Ryan Maher from Busy Car on talking about recalls in the past. Just for my edification, tell me a little bit about how you guys are differentiated and what you do differently than Busy Car does and that type of thing.
Absolutely. So Recall Masters was founded 10 years ago, right before the Takata airbag fiasco happened. So obviously our timing was a bit fortuitous. I had looked at other players in the industry that were out there doing some things kind of ancillary or tertiary to recalls. They were using recalls like for marketing, direct marketing campaigns and so forth, but really kind of missing the heart of the matter. And when I analyzed the recall space specifically, I understood that there was not really a centralized provider that understood all things recalls across all the different manufacturers. So my claim to fame is creating the first centralized recall database that was standardized, pulling all the information from all the different OEMs into one place, where we looked at all the different factors and attributes of a recall and started to rate them or categorize them accordingly. For instance, we know which recalls have a chance of collision, have a chance of creating a fire, are a general safety risk, or emissions related, or are what we call a nuisance or neutral recall, meaning they don't actually create a specific safety risk. Maybe it's a page of your owner's manual that needs to be replaced, as opposed to a window motor that might cause a 2,000-degree fire to flame right away, right? So we really look at those issues. We categorize don't drive recalls separately from safety recalls or a stop sale recall, right? So that we know whether or not the manufacturer is recommending the consumer doesn't drive the vehicle. We know when there's a loaner made available, right, by the OEM, so that the consumer is not out of a vehicle if there's a situation where maybe they need to wait for a part, but it's also a dangerous recall that's out there. We also look at the recalls and from a dealer perspective, understand which ones kind of pay the most in terms of parts and labor, so that way the dealer can understand that there's some money to be made from certain recalls out there. We don't allow cherry picking as part of our programs, but we do allow the dealerships to really specify and control which parts are available. That way we're really making sure we communicate out with consumers that have the ability to actually make the repairs and are not creating a situation where there's frustration, et cetera. And then one of the big differentiators from our company is we also take all this information in our database and make it available via API. So Recall Masters actually powers the majority of the desktop software applications that are sitting at the dealership today, whether it's an inventory management system, a scheduling system, a lane application being used by a service advisor. We power all of these different apps and push the recall data into those so that you've got the information you need at your fingertips when you need it most.
Okay. Interesting. Interesting. Cool. Cool. One of the other things too, Chris, that I'll tell you up front is that I'm particularly interested in is, as I mentioned earlier, I think that recalls are just it's a great opportunity for dealers, and I'm fortunate. I was fortunate to be selected to speak again at NADA this next year in February in 2026. And hard to believe, but NADA wants my PowerPoint deck in a few weeks, finalized in a few weeks. And one of the things that I put into this year's presentation, and we'll build into it, is the importance of recalls. So if you have any type of key metrics or data that you can quote that could make its way into that presentation, I would love that. And obviously, we'll give attribution to recall masters in the presentation deck too, in terms of source of that data. So I'm a bit of a metrics
Great.
freak, and so if you have any metrics like that you can build into the discussion, that would be fantastic too.
Absolutely. Well, one of the first things we were surprised to find out is that over half of the vehicles with an open recall moving through a dealership are often returned back to the customer without having the recall repaired. So if you talk to the dealership level, they'll say our people are checking every vehicle that comes through the service lane and make sure that the open recalls are repaired. But we have the data to show that's not exactly happening, right? Because as we process all of those vehicles that have come through, say in the last 90 days, we see that of those that had a recall, half of them are being returned to the customer without being repaired. And these are recalls specifically that have parts available, right, that could have been repaired had
Okay.
they been aware of it, right? So those are clear missed opportunities that
Wow.
are out there. And obviously that creates a situation where, geez, if you reach out to those customers right after they've taken their car in, they're going to have kind of a negative perception or experience about the deal. They're like, why didn't you take care of this at the time when I was just in there visiting? So that was one of the first things, is that understanding that dealerships don't, and they shouldn't necessarily be beholden to have this much control over every little aspect of the process. Recall masters comes into a dealership and helps set up what we call a recall department, right? Where we understand that recalls affect everything from inventory to a pre-delivery inspection to the scheduling process to the experience of the consumer in the service lane, right? So there's all these different facets of the vehicle life cycle and ownership experience that recalls affect, and we really try to address all of those at the right time. So for instance, if somebody's scheduling a oil change and they're on the phone with a BDC or online through the scheduler, that's the best time to tell them, hey, we're happy to schedule your oil change, but we need your car for a few hours extra to also take care of this recall. Otherwise, you create this situation where now the customer brings the car in, they find out they've got a recall on it. Now they were only expecting to have their car gone for half a day, not a full day, right?
Right.
So by being ahead of the curve on this, it's really helpful. And then when you talk about pushing out recalls from the standpoint of bringing customers in, right? You can help get 50% plus response rates at times with these customers that haven't visited in 6 months, year, 18 months, right? So they're on the brink of being lost customers, and to recapture them and bring them back in, maybe they're due for service, scheduled service anyway, using the recall as that motivating factor, making it clear that there's no out-of-pocket money required to repair the recall, is a very good thing that consumers are not necessarily always aware of. So you get to kill a couple birds with one stone. Talking more about some stats, this is something that we used very much to show dealerships when we started talking about recalls and the value of them. Over half of the money generated for recall related service visits is customer pay revenue, meaning when somebody brings their car in to get a recall repaired, maybe it's going to pay $200 in warranty pay revenue. That means that $200 or more of the revenue generated from that program or campaign is going to be customer pay. So if a dealer makes, say, $1,000,000, over 500,000 of that is going to be related to customer pay, parts, and labor sales that's generated. So when we push out these campaigns and bring customers in for recalls, they are getting additional work done. And there was a perception or idea within the industry that recalled vehicle owners were like the redheaded stepchildren of the industry, pardon the expression, but they were not getting the attention that they deserve, because there was the idea that they would just come in, get the recall repaired, and get no further work completed on their vehicles. But that's absolutely not true. It turns out that if you treat these customers right, if you roll out the red carpet for them, you show them the full dealership experience, you give them a loaner car, you show them the shuttle service, you give them a free car wash, do a multi-point inspection on the vehicle, including a video walk around, right? They see that there is a big difference between going independent. And you also obviously offer them maybe a discount. Hey, we're sorry you had to bring your car in for this recall, but we found some other issues with it, wanted to offer you 20% off to get these things fixed. Well, we've got the car up on the lift already. And that's a very positive experience for the consumer. And what happens is they actually end up coming in for additional work after that. So the retention rate is quite strong with related recalls if you do it right. And that's part of the education process. It's in there. And guess what? Once you have somebody who's servicing at the dealership, they also may end up buying a car from you. So we find that the car repurchase rates are quite high as well. And this is all related to, I think it's 1 in 10 customers that end up coming in for a recall repair and buying from the dealership. So that ends up being a pretty big number. Typically from a recall campaign, we see 20-to-1 gross revenue ROI on these programs. So for every dollar you put in, you're getting at least dollars, sometimes up to $50 back in gross revenue. I don't want to speak to a dealer's own profitability and margins and so forth, but certainly when they participate in the types of programs that we do, and we see 15 to 20, 25% response rate, it really comes out to a lot of money, dollars and cents wise, in terms of what dealers
Absolutely.
on these programs.
I'm curious, Chris, when you look back and customers you're able to bring in for that recall, do you have any sense as to, for the average customer who you're pulling in for a recall, how long it's been since they've been into the dealership for service?
Yeah. So over half the customers that we bring in have been 9 months or more since they visited the dealership. They're overdue for service already, and they're on the brink of being that lost customer where they're in that 12 to 18 month range of getting service. So it's quite phenomenal in terms of looking at the ability, because if somebody's been 9 months or a year and they haven't come in, odds are they're not going to come in. They're at that like 60-70% rate of those customers do not make it back into the dealership. So we really help with that kind of at the margin incremental retention.
Gotcha. And then after the recall visit, do you have any sense in terms of, looking, say, a year after the recall visit, what percentage of those customers have returned back for scheduled maintenance service or any other type of service at the dealership?
We find between 40 and 50% of those customers return.
Beautiful.
As opposed to 25-30%, right? So you see almost double the retention rates of customers related to a good recall experience.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. I'm also curious, because I was just looking into some data around this. For the average, do you have any sense as to how old the vehicle is for the, if you can put an average on an average recall, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, any sense there for what that number is?
Yeah, so the Title 49, Part 573 of regulation mandates that a manufacturer is responsible for fixing a car with a recall for 10 years from its in-service date, right? So theoretically, if all the vehicles that are 2025 model years are sold in 2025, you've got until 2035 to fix them. But right now, obviously going back to, say, 2015, 2014 model years. And most recalls happen within the first 6 years of the vehicle life. So it's not necessarily just under the warranty period. It's usually about double the warranty period, which is a problem for manufacturers. They'd much rather have issues come up during that warranty period when they're beholden to fix the car anyway versus that period afterwards. But it also does present an opportunity to then get these customers back, because once customers fall out of warranty is when they're most likely to defect, right? Over 70% of customers stop servicing the dealership once they're no longer under the warranty period being covered. One of the things we also discovered, which is helpful for OEMs, is that for every recall customer that comes in, they on average have $60 in customer pay part sales that goes back to the manufacturer. That's not the price the dealer charges. That's what the OEM gets paid by the dealership for part sales. So a typical recall usually has $60 or less than parts. And my point is that even when a OEM or manufacturer has a recall that's issued, they typically make on average as much or more in parts revenue back as they do in the parts price that it is to get the car repaired. And OEMs are in the business, right? They'll sell a car at cost just to have all of that additional parts revenue start to come back in down the road.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because because the analysis that we're doing, that we've recently done, is that when you look at the majority of where a dealership's parts and service revenue comes from, as defined by model year, it's kind of, as you might expect, a normal distribution curve. But that normal distribution curve kind of peaks at that 5 and 6 year period.
Right.
and when you think about it, that makes sense, in that those are vehicles that need brakes, batteries, tires, that type of thing, and are typically close to being or are already out of warranty. And yet that's exactly when those customers are typically defecting to aftermarket providers. So it's absolutely essential that that we help dealerships make sure that they're doing everything they can to retain those customers, and recalls are just one of those great ways.
It's sort of convenient, but it's also no surprise, right? And so if you think about this kind of intuitively, that okay, the average vehicle lifespan is 12, 13 years these days. And obviously that first 5 to 10 years is going to be the period when things are discovered that are wrong with the vehicle. It does follow a normal distribution bell curve in that regard.
Yep. What are some other perhaps surprising stats around open recalls that dealerships may not be aware of?
Yeah. So the biggest one, as I mentioned before, is that there's a lot of cars moving through that aren't repaired. And I think the other fun stat is related to the experience of the customer. They have a high CSI score, right? So if you're talking about JD Powers doing a customer satisfaction index or a follow-up call after they visited, if you handle recall vehicles customers correctly, you're turning a negative into a positive.
So let's talk a little bit about the role of data and ROI on that data. Recall Masters, as you were saying earlier, pulls from dozens of data sources. How does that data advantage translate itself into more recall completions for the dealership, or for vehicle owners, as well as better retention for the dealership? What's
Absolutely. I'm glad you asked this program. So one of the little known facts about, say, direct marketing or direct response marketing is that around 80% of the success of the campaign is dependent upon the quality of the data and the contact information you have available. So that means a good email, a good telephone number, a good mailing address, right? So Recall Masters really is able to penetrate some of the privacy and regulatory issues. We've got auto loan information, right? Who's paying for the loan on the vehicle, insurance information, who's the insured drivers on the vehicle, driver registration information, title information, right? Who actually owns the vehicle and is registering it with the local Department of Motor Vehicles. Being able to access these information sources makes us very good, and having our own internal processes, some of it AI based, machine learning based, right, for analyzing information and who the most likely owner is, makes us very much top tier. And we approach it as a two-step process. First is identifying who's currently driving the car, or is responsible for that maintenance. And the second piece is, do we have what's called right contact information for them? So do we know what their current mailing address is? Even if they registered a vehicle a year ago, some states have multi-year registrations on vehicles, right? So even if they registered a vehicle a year ago, do we have their most up-to-date current address? And we're able to get information from the utility companies, right? Your oil, gas, garbage, etc., to find out what a person's current address is. We're also able to append email and phone information directly from some of the telephone carriers, directly from some of these utility companies, such that we are getting a full range 360-degree ability to reach out to these consumers. We send text messages, we do emails, we do phone calls, we send direct mail, we follow a what we call a perfect contact cadence, where we know, okay, if we've got the right information, then we've got a 90% chance of making sure that our message is at least communicated out to that consumer. And that's why you start to see these 25, 30, 50% response rates at times from our programs and campaigns, because we've done so many touch points in the right order at the right time of day, days of week, right? We're factoring in what somebody's work schedule could be to make contact with them. That makes all the difference in terms of optimizing response rates for these programs and getting those recalled vehicles off the road repaired. And everyone wins in this situation, right? Consumer gets a recall vehicle repaired at no cost to them. Dealership gets the retention or recapture or new customer acquisition benefits. OEMs got the government off their back as they're getting the vehicles repaired. And obviously Recall Masters wins because we have good programs.
Mhm. Gotcha. So, once you've got that customer um, identified that has a recall, what kind of, I'm just curious in terms of what kind of trends are you seeing in terms of which communication methods kind of work best in 2025, say versus, even 2020, 2022, something like that. What's ascendant, what seems to be more getting more effective, and what's kind of falling away, if you can if it's even possible to generalize to that extent.
I can. And believe it or not, direct mail is still the primary and strongest driver. The thing with direct mail, though, is somebody might get a recall notice in the mail and put it on the refrigerator, and you see responses coming in 3-6 months after. Like in some cases, dealers aren't even on our program anymore because we've already gone through all the recalls in their area within 50 miles of them over that 6-9 month span. And you still have phone calls and appointments being scheduled related to this recall just because people are not exactly over eager to get their recalled vehicle in for repair, but they do put those notices on the refrigerator. So about half the responses we see from our program are coming over time, over that 90 to 180 day period related to the recalls, and those are primarily driven from direct mail. The other half of the recall response rates are coming from the emails, the text messages, the phone calls that are getting out there, and those are typically the ones where we get a more instantaneous response, right? Somebody gets an email, they reply right away. It's like they're tagging or pinning the email to their inbox for 6 months and then responding later. And they're certainly not doing the same with text messages. That's why it's important that for text messages and emails, we're doing a little bit of follow-up, right? We might send 5 or 6 emails out over a 10-12 week period to get contact out there, and maybe send a second text message. We try not to be annoying, but we really try to straddle that line between being assertive and persistent without being spammy in any way.
Sure, sure. I'm curious, Chris, if you have thoughts on terms of once a recall is complete, how do dealerships keep that customer retained and coming back for maintenance, coming back for repairs, coming back for tires?
Yeah.
How does the a recall campaign kind of integrate itself into an overall retention strategy?
Yep. Glad you asked that, actually. And our dealers asked the same questions, right? There was this time earlier on in the business where we were pushing out a lot of recall campaigns, and then the customers weren't coming back as often, or it ends up hurting the retention benchmarks or guidelines put out by the OEM for the dealership. So the dealerships were coming back to us and saying, hey, what can we do to bring these customers back in or keep them back in so we can keep our high retention rates as high as they've always been or better, right? And that's where we developed, in our case, what we call a gift card program, which works quite well. I can give you a quick sample of what that looks like. We've got a gift card program that we send out, which is like a credit card quality mailer. And again, we're doing this via email and text messaging, et cetera. And this is going out to people that have now at this point done business with the dealership already, right? So they're in the customer database, which means we don't fall beholden to the same privacy regulation guidelines in terms of our uses of data, right? Because it's not like we're using DMV data to send out any sort of advertising. But it's very important that there's a full follow-up strategy that the dealer employs, whether using recall masters or not, in terms of, again, if they've done that multi-point inspection when the consumer came in for the recalls, sometimes there's services that may have been declined, right? Which create follow-up opportunities. And if you send those coupled with some sort of a coupon or discounted offer, that creates a really strong incentive for the consumer to now follow through and get those additional maintenance repairs completed on their vehicle that they may not have taken up on the dealership at the time when the recall was completed, right? So there needs to be a full strategy with regards to recall retention that extends past the actual initial recall repair.
Sure, makes sense. Makes sense. I'm also curious, Chris, in terms of, when you look at a dealership who, say, is average at executing recall campaigns, or even less than average, as compared to one who is like world class, what is the difference operationally between those two dealerships, or from a management standpoint?
As you might expect, it's drastic, right?
Yeah.
So typically when we come in and analyze a dealership's market, we'll see, okay, they've got, say, 50,000 units in operation within a 25-mile radius, whatever it may be, right? So we'll come in and look at that dealership's market, analyze, okay, of these 50,000 vehicles, maybe 10,000, 15,000 of them have a open recall on them. We know what the averages are for each manufacturer within every given market based upon how many recalls each manufacturer is issuing. So some manufacturers are a little more liberal about recalls, some are a little less liberal. There's also the concept of a voluntary recall versus a NHTSA mandated recall. And this is an important point to bring up. One of the things that we understood right away is when we founded Recall Masters was that there's the idea of customer service campaigns or extended service campaigns, extended warranty programs. The OEMs all call them by something different, but there is the ability for a manufacturer to issue what's essentially a voluntary recall, meaning it doesn't rise to the level of being a NHTSA mandated recall, but the manufacturer has recognized that there was a defect in the manufacturing process. Maybe it's not affecting life and death of everyone, but that races to a voluntary recall. The last couple of years, I think it was 2023, was the first time we found that the number of voluntary recalls actually outnumbered the number of NHTSA mandated recalls that were out there. So you've got a lot more recalls out there than you might expect if you factor in that there's these voluntary recalls. We draw the line where, because there's also the concept of a warranty extension, right? But we draw the line if the manufacturer is sending out a physical mailer of some kind or a communication to let the customers know that they've got this defect on their vehicle, even if it's not a NHTSA mandated recall, we call that a voluntary recall, right? A warranty extension is something where they're not going to that level, but if somebody brings the car in and there's a problem, then they can fix it and get the warranty reimbursement covered by the manufacturer, right? But a voluntary recall is something which has kind of been elevated to the level, not as far as a NHTSA mandated, and those are really important. So when we go and analyze a dealership's market, we can see, okay, the average for between these warranty voluntary recalls and these NHTSA mandated recalls, that this OEM may have on average of 15% or 20% of the UIOs in a given market. But if we see that the dealer's got 25% or something, then we know that they're not as good at clearing those recalls out. And it's usually significant, right? It's usually between 35, 50% less than their peers are. And that creates obviously a lot of opportunity for us, but it also shows us that there's some things process-wise at the dealership that need to be fixed. Maybe the check for the recall needs to be integrated in the scheduler process, needs to be integrated within their business development center, their call center when they're scheduling appointments, needs to be integrated into the service lane and make sure that recall checks are being done at the time when the vehicle is brought in to make sure that you're not really missing these opportunities and that you're addressing them at the right time that's most appropriate.
Right. Makes sense. So as we come to the end of our time together here, Chris, I'm going to ask you to kind of polish up your crystal ball, and where do you see the future of recall management heading, especially with EVs, more and more EVs coming on board, and software related recalls as well. What do you see coming down the pike?
Yep. Well, we certainly don't see any less number of recalls being issued. Software bugs and glitches are not going to go down in any way that they already are. In fact, I think there may be more software bugs and issues related to vehicles. So obviously you've got these platform changes where you've got less moving parts in a vehicle, but because now they're basically big giant driving computers, you were going to have a lot of those over the air updates. But the flip side of this is you're still going to have all those same mechanical issues as well, and you're still going to need to bring the car in, and those are still going to be paying at a higher rate. So you might see less overall mechanical recalls that require the vehicle to come in repair, but they're going to be paying a higher amount because those are more expensive parts and components that are associated with them. We don't see vehicle ownership, despite the autonomous vehicles that are out there, whether it's the Waymo or Tesla robotaxi service, et cetera. We don't see car ownership going anywhere immediately, at least, right? I think we're still some days away from Minority Report. But one of the things that Recall Masters is getting into is now the prediction side of things, right? We know that, say, known safety defects are sort of low-hanging fruit, right? We've already identified them. There have been these vehicles that are breaking down. There have been enough of them happening that they've now risen to the level of becoming a NHTSA mandated recall. So now when we come in and look at vehicles, we're starting to look at build information, right? And being able to determine that, hey, if this part was used in this vehicle by this manufacturer and caused a safety recall or defect, and we see that that same part's being used in another manufacturer, then we can kind of predict that there's going to be other issues coming on. So now Recall Masters is moving toward this predictive analytics side of thing where we're able to predict what sorts of problems you're going to see with various vehicles at certain year, make, model, mileage ranges that are going to happen. And maybe we can proactively address these things and even share that information with the OEM so that they build better cars.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and obviously goes back to your earlier point of having these multiple data sources enables you to have visibility into that, to be able to use predictive analytics to help identify what's going to be coming down the road.
Absolutely.
That's great. Chris, thanks very much for number one, for being on the podcast. Really appreciate it. I think you've given our listeners a ton to think about and some great new information, hopefully, that they were not aware of. If any of our listeners did want to get a hold of you, what's the best way for them to do so?
Obviously, they can pop on to recallmasters.com and hit the contact or submission form. If they mention somewhere in the notes that they came in and listened to the podcast, I would love to know about the sourcing of that, of course. If not, I'm just happy to provide information that helps the industry.
Super. Sounds great. Chris, thanks very much. Really appreciate you being on on Retention Roadmap today.
Thank you for the invitation. Bye, Bill.
You've been listening to Retention Roadmap, navigating service success for new car dealerships. Subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts.